Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is David Wortley. I'm the Virtual Conferences Director at IORMA. I just want to go through a few housekeeping items before we actually hand over to Richard Emmett, who's our moderator for this afternoon. To begin with, our remit in holding this webinar is IORMA are a global consumer commerce centre. We're a neutral organisation for businesses and governments, and our aim is to work with people who recognise the need to understand and respond in ways in which the 7.7 billion global consumers on this planet are changing, and the kind of products and services that they want and need, and the ways in which they obtain them. And these changes are happening globally, driven by developments in society, in business, and in technology. So we are a neutral, non-political organisation, and our aim is to help you get the very best from our webinar events. Just a couple of housekeeping items to remind you that if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button on your screen to type in any questions you may have. Comments you can use the chat area for, but please reserve your questions for the Q&A session. So now, after that introduction and welcome, I'd now like to hand over to Richard Emmett, who's the moderator for this afternoon, and I'm going to ask him to introduce the event and our participants. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this IORMA webinar. I'm particularly excited today with the topic. I mean, I think even though I'm not a film historian or a filmmaker myself, of course, everyone's got an experience somewhere in their, their first major film or the first film they went to with a girlfriend or whatever it might be. We all love film and the media in general. So I'm really excited by the audience, by the panelists that we have today, and obviously welcome the questions as well from the audience as we go along. That hopefully we can ask one or two of those questions at the end or during our talk today. So without further ado, I will hand over soon just to quickly for the panelists to introduce themselves. Just before I do that, my role at IORMA is the consulting director. My sort of big sort of DNA is really digital disruption. So I come at this more of a from a point of view of looking at the digital disruption around selling more to consumers in retail, maybe fashion retail as well as general retail. And so I don't really profess to know that much about films. So I'm super excited to hand over to my panelists. Thank you. Maybe if we just start, if everyone's unmuted, I'll introduce, Ross, maybe you can introduce yourself first.
Yeah, hi, my name's Russ Edwards. I'm Technology Director at IORMA. I'm also co-founder of ImageScope Productions and also Shooting Stories. I've got a background in film editing and CGI, and currently working on a number of virtual reality projects.
Thank you. Over to Nadia.
Hello, just unmuted. So my background is in documentary film. I was a producer director for a number of years. I was also an investment banker for many more years. And now I write about film. And I'm really here today as an advocate for film, but from an audience perspective. I think the future is very exciting, and I look forward to discussing all of this with you today.
Thank you, Nadia. Great. Over to Philip.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Philip Natchbull. I'm the CEO of the Curzon Group. Curzon is probably best known for its cinemas, but we're actually not a cinema company. We are a film platform where we have cinemas, film distribution, and a streaming platform. So it's like a three-legged stool. And I joined the company 14 years ago to build this up into the company it's become today. So we're very disruptive, we're very innovative, but we have great history dating back 1934.
Thank you, great. and Bertrand.
Good afternoon. I'm Bertrand Moulier. I earn my living by being an advocate for the economic and legal interest of people who produce film and television content. Sorry, I used that ugly word. And I do this through tendering services to trade associations that operate in the business globally and have connections also with the distribution and exhibition sector. So,
thank you. So, I mean, I think what I'd like to do is maybe just kick off first in terms of the, given there's so much, we've heard a few of these words, digital disruption already. I love the sort of the three-pronged stool approach, if you like, strategic approach from Philip there from Curzon. It was really around the film industry and how the cinemas are changing. Is a general question at the moment around how do you see the film industry and cinemas will change over the next 2 to 5 years? So forget maybe for the moment the disruption that we've all gone through with COVID and lifting up. Just in general terms, around the digital disruption, how do we see the film industry and cinemas changing in the next 2 to 5 years? Perhaps, given your innovation, I'll address that question first to Philip, if I may. Great.
Sorry, I think the industry was already changing. Hang on a moment. Later. I think the industry was already changing very much before the current situation that we entered into. And what the pandemic has done is accelerated the changes that were already taking place. You used to have the three silos, what I call the three silos of production, distribution, and exhibition, and never the two shall talk to each other. We're heading towards an integrated situation where the customer is in control. In fact, the customer has been in control for a long time, but the industry has failed to recognize that. And so there are very out-of-date business practices that continue to exist, that the walls of which are finally crumbling. The main one of which that held back the change is this idea that a film has to be shown exclusively in a cinema in the UK for 16 weeks before it is available to be seen in any other format. And in the digital age where the customer is in control, that is a nonsense. All it's done is created piracy and confusion amongst consumers. So what you're going to see is a unification of availability of new content in different ways, available simultaneously. I like to use the analogy of water because everyone understands it. You know, you have bottled water, fizzy water, still water, you have tap water, you have all, rivers of water. How you touch that water and engage with that water is down to you or where you're at. And really the consumption of content should be thought of in those terms. So that's what we've done at Curzon. Being a distributor of our own movies, for instance, last year we distributed the Oscar-winning film Parasite. We control how we distribute that. So we put it into our own cinemas, we can put it onto our streaming platform. We do everything mainly simultaneously. And that's our business model. And I think that's the way the industry is going.
Right, thank you. And clearly, although the consumers love that, they consume it in whichever way they want to consume the film. I mean, I think that's created a whole new area of how we produce as well, because of the way you have the big screen and the small screen and that flexibility. So just over to maybe to Nadia in terms of just what are your thoughts of how the industry might change, and what does this mean? What you just heard from Philip, what does this mean in terms of the creativity side?
I think that Curzon has led the way and really broken the mold, especially over the last 2 years, especially in relation, for example, to the 16-week window, but also in treating all viewers across the country equally. So you don't have a two-tier public. Some people who are able to go to the movies and therefore get to see a film like Parasite and then are part of a conversation, whilst others are completely excluded. So people who have to stay at home, either for financial reasons or childcare or physical health, anything like that, they're part of that group now. So it creates a much, much bigger community of people who are sharing a common experience in different ways. And I think that's a fundamental thing. And that's going to drive the future, because we're going to get more and more of that in different ways.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so just changing it slightly, maybe a light-hearted question at the moment around now we've only recently been able to open up some of the cinemas and things. You know, does this now mean that we'll have a flooding back of people in, or what is the interaction of a cinema versus a small screen? I mean, I think if you can go to a cinema near you, then should you, or do you think there are other reasons there?
It's a matter of public trust. So there will be certain cinema chains that you're going to trust automatically. One, because of their track record and their brand, and also because they communicate very well the safety measures they put in place. So if you look, for example, at the Curzon website, they're really clear about what they're about to do. And I think for most people who are now well informed about what's happening with the pandemic, they know that the challenges now are public hygiene and public health messaging ones more than anything. If the message is clear, then people can be reassured. There's no reason not to go as long as you're able to control the risks. And so I think that a large number of people, especially younger people who are, less risk averse anyway, there's no reason for them not to flood back in. What I'd like to see is also access to cinemas and to other cultural sites to be facilitated. So, for example, transport. Instead of spending £4 on a tube ticket, if you're going to cycle to a cinema, that you actually have cycle pathways that facilitate the whole cultural space of the city. These measures, I think, are now completely possible, reasonably easily implemented, because it's also part of the Mayor of London's plan in any case. So in that way, the future is bright.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I absolutely agree in the sense that it will lift, but lift gradually. And I wish, Curzon, I think I might be right in this, Philip. Your first cinema's opening on the 17th or something. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of planning involved there. But I really welcome you opening up again, and I'm sure all the local cinema goers of that town will welcome that too. So just coming back maybe to the initial question of how the film industry and the cinemas are changing, maybe directing this question more to Bertrand now, with your understanding of the sort of national and international and protecting the producers and the actors and so on. Maybe just share some thoughts, Bertrand?
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, it's I certainly agree with colleagues on this kind of, I think Philip described it as the elimination of silos in the way consumers are allowed to access films and other forms of audiovisual work. I think in terms of the physical infrastructure of cinemas, so long as the Hollywood studios have a dog in that race, and they appear to still do, this infrastructure will last. And even with the kind of the blow of COVID, we're seeing that the studios right now are putting major releases in hiatus. Films like Tenet, Mulan, Wonder Woman, Matrix 4 are all being reprogrammed for later on, rather than being programmed directly on VOD, because they still believe that this is the market model to follow, certainly for the big movies. But at the same time, we're seeing those conglomerates transfer all of their assets gradually to the B2C environment, to the online environment. We've seen the launch of Disney Plus and ESPN Plus, and soon to be followed by many others, HBO Max and so on. So once that transformation is complete, I think, and once the power brokers in California align with that, I think we're going to see a lot more flexibility in the market. I would be prepared to bet on this. And I'm a subscriber. I'm an enthusiastic customer of the Curzon Group, and it's very interesting because even intimidation would not have kept me from going to see Alfonso Cuarón's Roma at the Curzon Mayfair Screen 1. But on the other hand, I recently accessed an auteur French film, which is also programmed by Philips Group on the transactional VOD platform that is available, the Curzon branded platform that's available on my connected TV, because that's a film I didn't feel I had an urgent need to go and see in the cinema. So it's that sort of variegated offer and flexibility is probably a good thing. One of the issues we're going to have as producers and people who sell movies and trade in this area is that traditionally the value of the theatrical release was used to peg the pricing on the exploitation of the rights in other media, in transactional VOD, in subscription VOD, in television broadcasting, and so on, in of course in DVD, remember that format. And so if we're going to change currency, there may be a period of confusion rather than disruption.
Right, well, that's true. Thank you. And in terms of in terms of the disruption and the way the distribution is changing, do you think that will have an impact on the budgets and how the budgets come together as well, in terms of whether you're a big player or even a smaller player?
Do you mean in terms of the role that the streamers are playing and the VOD players are now?
Yeah, I think probably. I mean, taking aside, it presumably costs more or less, whatever the story, and we'll come to that hopefully soon, to produce a film. But in terms of, because the distribution is going broader and faster, perhaps there's a different pricing. Well, there is a different pricing model. So therefore, does that make it different in the way that you might produce a film?
Well, thank you. There's all sorts of issues. I think that the first one is, are we going to have a Brave New World where there's only about 3 or 4 players left, and therefore you have, if your project doesn't make it, you're left kind of high and dry? Or are we going to see, 1,000 flowers of creation bloom? Are we going to see enough diversity in this marketplace? And it's quite difficult. I think in the European context, it's quite interesting to see the role that, and I don't want to be an advocate for the BBC, but the BBC has had one inside advantage from the point of view of local creators here and producers. Is in a way, the license fees you could describe as a source of free venture capital, which has enabled people to test new concepts and new styles and new ideas. We've seen it recently with things like Fleabag and I May Destroy You, which where they're not completely sheltered from market logic, but they are in a way in a kind of safer harbor where they can attempt to experiment with new stuff, and then that goes on to make the companies that were able to make them in that way able to retain IP and go and exploit that in world markets. If we're on the other hand dominated by a few conglomerates whose business model tends to be, we commission the film 100% and we also own 100% of the upside, then that will work for some people. But for those companies here, we're trying to build a business based on IP and able to be self-sustainable. It begs questions as to whether there will be room for them to grow as alternatives.
Yes, that's a really good point. Well, in terms of Ross, in terms of your experience as a producer or on the sidelines of a producer, how has this market change impacted you as a producer?
Well, I think that the big changes is obviously going to be the distribution channels and such like. But I think there's one example recently, which is the Universal film Trolls World Tour, which might not be top of everyone's list to see, but which was going to be a cinema release, and they released it on streaming instead. And Universal were very happy with the figures they got from it, and now said that they're looking forward to doing this more often. And to which I think the Odeon and Cineworld have come out and maybe banning Universal films from their cinemas in the future. So I think obviously one of the main things about cinemas is that they do have that early watch date. You know, you can watch something before it comes to release. So once they start losing that, I think that is probably an issue for cinemas. They're going to have to sort of tackle in some way, which I know is one of the other questions.
Yes, okay. And then maybe circling back to you, Philip, in terms of what you've just heard from the colleagues. You seem to be an early innovator really in the space, to sort of go from cinemas to a home cinema or home consumption. How are you finding things? Depending on how much you can disclose, are you finding that there's been a massive pickup, presumably, in the home entertainment, because, of course, not only because of COVID, but because the demand is there? Are you finding that a first mover advantage has worked for you?
Well, yes. I mean, you know, as a cinema company, as a company with cinemas, we've been saved by two things. One was the runaway success of the film that we licensed, Parasite. And the other one is the 300% increase in sales we've had on our streaming platform, Curzon Home Cinema, since shutdown. And that's enabled us to accelerate our data gathering, our targeted marketing, our engagement with customers, and it's enabled us to formulate and completely rejig our acquisition policy for film rights. So we always buy all rights for the UK, but in this instance, rather than just having 15 to 20 traditional films that we would put into the cinemas, and on our streaming platform, we're going to probably buy 25 to 35 exclusively for Curzon Home Cinema, but also put them in one or two cinemas of Curzon's and maybe a few other independent cinemas. And then concentrate on 2 or 3 bigger titles that we would do more traditionally if we still want to embrace that model, which means you have to protect the 16-week window to get yourselves into a much larger cinema release. In terms of what's happening in the marketplace, I want to be very clear about something, which is, yes, I do believe the studios are supportive of the major cinema chains, and they do create downstream value for the streaming platforms by being released into the cinemas. But the studios have been very unsupportive, really, because they do want to control the window of exclusivity and not have it as a 16-week exclusivity. And I think Bertrand is right that we're going to move to a more bespoke system where some of the bigger franchise films will need to go out through the cinemas globally on a global basis simultaneously, and some of the smaller films will have a day and date strategy, which is what we employ at Curzon, where it's simultaneously available on a streaming platform and in the cinema. But once that window starts to shorten, and it will, it just has to. The laws of nature, the way the market is going, it says it will. Trolls being just one early example of what's going to happen. Then the economic model, which these huge cinema chains have predicated their business models on, which is, exclusivity on a global basis for 16 weeks. They've borrowed billions of dollars and leveraged those companies. And that level of debt has meant that they have to protect the existing business model in order to maintain the cinema admissions. Because as you shrink the window, inevitably some people who go to the cinema only because they can see that film in the cinema will stop going to the cinema. I still believe lots of people will go to the cinema, which is why I'm still building cinemas. But if you take the business model as it exists and you shrink the window of exclusivity, then you're going to get that situation where some people are not going to go. So I see a massive fall off in global cinema admissions, maybe 20-30% globally. And the result of that, you're going to see bankruptcies across the world's major cinema operators. And that will create new opportunities for new entrants to come in, where you have a more of an integrated approach to the business, as I've described and as we do at Curzon.
Do you think if I don't know, Amazon, for instance, has gone from Amazon Marketplace to Amazon Whole Foods and sort of shops, a bit more of a physical presence, do you think Amazon Prime and the film could even take on some cinemas? And would you personally quake if they did that, sitting as CEO of Curzon?
No, you see, I think that's inevitable. I mean, I've always said to my colleagues in the film business that we have to embrace the changes and not fight it. What Netflix are doing and what Amazon are doing, it's fantastic for a lot of filmmakers that otherwise are having films made that otherwise wouldn't be made. Let's be clear about that. In terms of whether or not it's a threat to me, no. We are a curated premium brand, and we can exist quite comfortably in any ecosystem that allows us to operate on a vertically integrated business. And to go back to the point about production, yes, it is going to put a squeeze on independent production companies where global streaming platforms are acquiring 100% of the movie by financing 100% of the movie. But I still believe the way around that is for companies like ourselves to be involved with the development of content, the production of content, the distribution of content on streaming platforms and other ancillaries, and in the exhibition of content. So the future for me is integration and direct to the consumer communication.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Bertrand now a question around the international side and the IP protection and so on. I mean, how important are the sort of different film institutes, and I mean, forgive me for not knowing all their names or all their, but
I'm not sure I know all of their names either, so I just...
No, okay. I know you know a few more than me though, Bertrand. How important are those international and national institutions in terms of fostering the creativity, but also protecting the intellectual property where it's applicable?
Well, I don't think the film institutes play much of a role in the protection of IP. That's more the domain of the copyright offices and the kind of whatever enforcement mechanisms are in place in various countries. What they do is they help you set up your mosaic finance. Typically, if you're making an independent film, it'll be made of different elements of financing. Some may be equity, some may be debt, some may be pre-sales to an all rights distributor in a territory, some may be a whole bunch of territories through a deal with a streamer in subscription video on demand. And it's very useful to have that first money from a public sector agency that helps you get going. In some cases, it will help the independent producer leverage enough negotiating power to also retain some of the IP rights and reserve some of the kind of, for example, sequel rights, rather than sell the store in order to get the film made, which again is not everybody's strategy, but the choice should exist. So they are useful. They play increasingly a part also in accompanying the so-called disruption and accompanying the kind of value chain changes that Philip and Nadia have illustrated so well. The other thing, and a recent example of that is where I come from originally in France, where the film agency there, which is a very powerful agency, has had the authorization to apply flexibility in the way films are released during the COVID crisis, because there were few possibilities to release films that were in line to be released theatrically, typically in April and May. Then the head of the agency was allowed to give leave to a local distributor to go straight to transactional video on demand, the kind of thing that Philip does on the Curzon platform. So you pay premium for it, but it's fresh. And then there are, in some countries, like in Germany, there's been an example of a film in which, in order to support the exhibition infrastructure, the cinema infrastructure, then some of the revenues from that transactional video on demand window, which was really inside the cinema window, were shared with the cinema chain that would have programmed the film if it had been able to do it. So there's kind of, COVID, as Philip said, has just pressed the fast forward button on a trend that was already very much engaged and is continuing.
Right, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the trends, of course, is this distribution, which we talked about. Another trend of particular interest in terms of some of our IORMA immersive technologies is AR and VR and that sort of application. So I'm just wondering, in terms of there's increasingly more use of AR and VR in the film production. Have you been actively involved in that too, Bertrand? I know Russ has been, and we'll get his point of view soon. But do you think that's a new, exciting way that we'll just build and build in terms of film production?
I'm certainly no Luddite when it comes to this stuff, but nor am I, I'm in the wrong demographics to have anything really intelligent to say about AI or VR. We all know these are growing entities. What I can notice is, because I do work on how to make our way out of the COVID production hiatus every day of the week, that there's a lot more talk about, can we do this using green screen rather than having actual background? Is there any other ways of kind of structuring that scene so we can use alternative technologies, doesn't require the presence? That said, I think what I notice with every new technology is there is kind of a deterministic enthusiasm at the beginning that is going to sort out all of mankind's issues. I do think that in anticipation reply to some of the Q&A here, is that it will find its place. I think AI, for example, is a very interesting, and Philip may have more to say on this. AI has an interesting role to play as an aid to marketing, for example, and sort of predictive marketing and all that kind of stuff, which has problematic things attached to it as well, but also carries potentials. But in terms of production, we're now facing an increase of production costs temporarily, we hope, through having to observe certain safety protocols around COVID on sets, of anything between 5 and 25%, which is huge on an independent picture. So there'll be a drive to try and see whether economies can be found through the use of the clever deployment of technology. That's about all I can say about it. I'm not really no expert on it.
Well, no, very, very intelligent answers. I don't expect you to be telling me how to code it or do the AI side necessarily. What, Ross, from your point of view, I mean, you're closer to the actual, if you like, technologies of it. Where have you deployed or used AR, VR in your film production? And maybe you can share your own thoughts on it.
One of the big changes recently is the game engines. We use Unreal quite a bit, which has changed a lot of the way the film industry works regarding sort of green screens and real-time sort of animation and stuff, and also digital humans and how this works. For VR itself, I think it's always going to be, because you are going to be dependent on headsets and things. I could see VR arcades integrating with cinemas as a way of being able to do narrative VR, as well as sort of selling VR as another aspect of a reason to go to the cinema as well, and use it as a game center as well, maybe. Yeah, you do get, and I have seen some immersive cinemas where you've got 3 screens, which is obviously a type of immersion. You got obviously other things like IMAX, and it's just, I think it's just looking at different technical ways that to encourage people to come to the cinema rather than sitting at home watching a 52-inch screen. I think it's very similar to the situation might be similar to the retail sector on the high street. Is especially after COVID, everyone's got used to ordering things from being at home and watching things on TV. It's giving people reasons to go back to the cinema. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, I think do you think in that respect maybe gaming industry is a bit further ahead in certain areas for that sort of immersive experience than perhaps filming has been so far? Or would you?
Yes, I think it has. I think it's a few years ago. Oh, sorry.
No, it's Ross. I'll direct that to you. Yes.
Yeah, I think the gaming engine started being used a few years ago into sort of big crowd scenes, and was used like this because the resolution wasn't high enough for anything else. But because the game industry is so big, so much money going into it, the technology now is actually so good that you can do a lot of live TV with it, with green screen, bringing in effects and live sort of aspects of it. And I know there's a lot of virtual use of the software in the making of films now. And so maybe even moving away from green screens, is having LCD screens of the background, so the actors have something tangible to act against rather than green screens, which I know sometimes is not the most popular way of acting all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, no, thank you. I mean, what are your thoughts, Philip, in terms of trying to, if you like, have a more immersive experience as a customer or as a family sitting in one of your cinemas in the future? Have you experimented a little bit? Forgive me, I'm not an expert in your cinemas yet, but I look forward to coming them soon.
Well, this word immersive, it's another buzzword, isn't it? It's a bit like experiential. Everyone talks about having experience. For me, what it's all about is a collective tribal thing where people come together in different ways to have a shared emotional experience. And 3 years ago, we opened the UK's first virtual screen at our new cinema in the Westgate Centre in Oxford, the Curzon, Oxford. It was a big space, and we were able to create a screen there, which became, as I said, the first VR screen. And it was immediately very popular. And the experience of people having an individual experience, sitting in a chair with headphones, with a film that they would have booked online, where it was personal to them, initially was popular. But then two things happened. One is it was a very individualistic experience. And two, the content just dried up. And so we closed it about a year ago. But it will come back. There will be a big future in it. It needs to be more immersive and more collectively immersive, so you can join in with other people, so you maintain that, a bit like you do. I mean, I have two teenage boys, and in lockdown they've just been on their individual computers talking to other people on headphones, playing video games. I think you can have the same experience with a 90-minute piece of drama where you're actually involved with other people. The fact is, you're sitting in a room, you can't see each other. You've arrived there, you've gone there on your bicycle or the public transport, you've had your drink, you've booked the room, and you go in and you have your individual collective experience. So that's what I think the future holds.
No, and I think that'd be really exciting, for sure. I think so. As the technology gets more and more user-friendly or more involved, I'm sure that'll be really powerful. I mean, I think you were seeing that a little bit in our sort of wider immersive technology use in retail, where we've got e-fans, e-sports, where people are very interactive now with some of the way that they share a sports game in live TV. But I mean, okay. In terms of maybe just turning it around a little bit around other technologies, I mean, we touched upon the distribution, touched upon a bit the immersive technologies. Maybe bring it right back to basics. I've always loved the whole experience of going to the cinema, interacting in the cafe, having a bit of food maybe as well. Talking about the film afterwards, and maybe ask Nadia to comment on this. I mean, basically, the experience of going to the cinema is more than just popcorn, isn't it?
It's a huge experience, and the immersive experience starts really early on. The atmosphere when you walk into a cinema, when you get your coffee and your chocolate brownie, or maybe, as you say, your popcorn, your beer, your glass of wine, and so on. Even if you're going in that space on your own, you're surrounded by other people, and there's experience of negative space, which is continuous from the moment you step in to the moment you leave. And you can actually hear the silence. You can sense the air around you. It is very, very different. And that experience of cinema is one which has existed for over 100 years. It cannot be lost. It's part of the magic. And the sense of expectation is then what also makes you so receptive to a film. Sometimes you're very surprised even by a film, but you're already primed for it in advance. So yes, that is a whole experience in itself.
And do you think as I mean, if we were all critics, film critics and so on, do you think, or even looking at the analysis, the amazing dynamics of the technology now, particularly around, say, Curzon home entertainment or other Netflix, etc. Do you think it's possible to predict, well, do you think it's possible to predict whether, you know, of this short list of 5 films you've just seen, which one's going to be the block seller or the best seller of that list? Can you tell that? Or is it just always going to be personal?
So, I mean, the business has changed so much in terms of how we acquire content. When I joined the company, you know, it was finger in the air. Your gut instinct was everything. You had very inefficient ways of marketing to a small audience. If you have niche films, you know, very, like, it was more like a shotgun. You fired your gun and the shot went everywhere. Now it's like a bullet. You can be much more accurate in deciding what is, but for instance, you know, traditionally you would buy a film, you'd release it in the cinema, and then, as Bertrand said, based on the box office, you'd be paid for it to go onto television. Now, by putting films on our streaming platform first, we can find out what is working and what isn't working, and then bring it back up into the cinema. People have this idea if something's been on a streaming platform first, people won't go to the cinema to see it, and that is just utter nonsense. Our data tells us that isn't true. There are different people who want to go to the cinema, or can go to the cinema, who can afford to, and there are those who don't want to, or just can't afford it. What I also, like, just to go back to the previous point about the immersive experience, cyberspace is very soulless and soul-destroying and can be quite lonely. What I love about having an integrated business like ours is you're talking to customers, but you're giving them options. You can watch something at home on a small phone, or you can come, as you know, to the Curzon Mayfair and join in with a Q&A and have a coffee with a friend and talk about films. So it's quite a soulful thing going to the cinema. And for me, you know, I learned so much about life by going to the cinema, and you can learn by watching at home too. It's just different experience, and it's all about connectivity. I think that's another word that we should talk about, feeling connected to the world. And yeah, that's what I want to say.
Oh, brilliant. I mean, it's wonderful to have that vision to sort of do the curation and to, you know, to pick up the Parasites or the other future films which are going to work. I mean, I mean, we're conscious of time a little bit here in terms of, I haven't seen, just a pointer to David in the background, I haven't seen questions yet come up on my screen. So I'm just going to circle back to some other questions as well. But I think I'm interested in the sort of the vertical integration too of the film industry. So, I mean, does that mean that there will there always be a time and place for small producers, I guess is my question, or do we need to be a big producer? You know, if you have the money, can you still be a small producer as such? Maybe to Bertrand and Nadia, you know, what do you think in terms of the vertical integration? Can you still be a niche of a certain technology or a niche of a certain genre, or do you have to sort of be everything? How do you think the industry is changing in that sense? To Bertrand first. Oh, sorry, you're on mute actually, Bertrand, sorry.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's brilliant.
All right, lovely. It's different. Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer conclusively. Yes, I think there'll always be producers, and there'll always be people breaking off from conglomerates who start their own businesses and develop original, you know, company cultures to create an enabling context for the talent. I think, you know, production is a cost center. It's not a profit center. So there's lots of people only too happy to take the production risk off the balance sheet and put it somewhere else. But I think we are seeing at the moment everyone who's anyone in the business trying to consolidate their hold up, both upstream in development to try and acquire IP early, and downstream in distribution and the kind of commercialization of rights, if you like. And one such phenomenon, which is very controversial at the moment, is amongst the talent agencies in Los Angeles, which are consolidating upstream and downstream, acquiring sales companies to make their own bidding and basically developing a package, as it's called in Hollywood jargon, from initial concept all the way to distribution channels. And that is a trend that some find worrying because, for example, the talent doesn't feel that their primary interest is going to be looked after. So everybody's scrambling for IP ownership and IP control. And the danger with this strategy is that producers are going to be left with too few gatekeepers to deal with very, very poor bargaining power, unable to derive fair terms of business for these ladies and gentlemen, and will basically be reduced to the lowly status of producer for hire. Now, you can be a very successful producer for hire. The producer here in London who successfully had The Man in the High Castle picked up by Amazon after 2 turns of turnaround for many years, was very satisfied with the fact that Amazon paid for everything and he got a decent fee and the right kind of CV exposure. But again, as I said, as the business evolves, there are lots of companies out there who won't be satisfied with just being a farming environment for a nursery environment for the development of ideas, only to see their IP being consolidated elsewhere. I don't feel sentimental about it, but it's certainly something that needs to be considered.
Yes, okay, thank you. Nadia, what do you think in terms of that sort of whole control and creativity and so on?
I come at this from a completely different angle, in the sense that I've had 35 years of watching films in the UK, knowing that there's so many other really great films that I won't get the chance to see. I go to festivals and I know that the films will not be distributed here, however wonderful they are, because there isn't the bandwidth. And what's become very, very clear over the last couple of years and has been amplified by COVID is that you have really a phenomenon of suddenly the possibility of having loads of the equivalent of independent publishers. So in principle, with a bit of money, I could possibly, with taking very little risk, persuade people who will not have a chance to distribute their films in the UK. I can say to them, oh, I'll build a platform. I've got an audience. I've built it over years. I have a YouTube channel. I'm going to show your films there for a fee, and we'll share the profits. So I can curate. So this is really at the level of independent filmmaking. It's about really new stuff. It's not about big money cinema, but big money cinema, we've seen a lot of it. The polite bourgeois films we have as well. A lot of young people want to see completely new things. And there's a risk. As a producer, as Bertrand says, it can be a really horrible life. You're very exposed. You can go bankrupt. If you're trying to do innovative stuff and you want to have some degree of autonomy, it's an almost impossible situation. But then you find people are working through these cracks and actually coming up with very interesting material. So that's my angle on things, and I want to see more of that. And I think that with the technology we have now, all of these things are becoming possible, potentially. I don't think they'll ever be dangerous. For example, Curzon is leading the way in a very established place, has created amazing content, but also audiences. But when it comes to the really, really big stuff, well, I'll always want to see a new Mission Impossible, but I'll be quite bored by quite a lot of the other big blockbusters. So in a way, I don't even care what happens to them.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. I mean, I think. Do you think this change in technology, maybe the argument that big Hollywood has become bigger with the bigger entities of Netflix, Amazon, and so on? I mean, do you think, although it can be positive, it can be potentially negative, some of the points we've raised today, do you think that there will be a shift in their power base, or do you think it's too money and too technology driven? So still the home of film is arguably the US. Do you think it could shift?
The reality is that Netflix and Amazon have acted in some ways as fairy godmothers to a certain number of independent filmmakers.
Right.
You know, they take more than their pound of flesh, possibly, but they also deliver global audiences. And I'd say that is a really hard dilemma for a producer, and they have to weigh the cost of that. From my perspective, it's amazing that they're there because they have changed the game completely for viewers, and they've also made it very cheap and accessible. So, you know, you're not disadvantaged by well, let's say if you can afford £6 a month, you'll be able to see some amazing films, even if I feel that I've been very lucky because I've had a film education, which is wildly beyond the confines of Netflix, but at least it's there.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe one of the questions coming up from the audience here, does the panel foresee an increasing engagement of consumers interacting with films? So a bit like our e-fans discussion, or or a bit like e-gaming and online games. Do you think there's going to be much more interaction with films? I think we kind of covered that a little bit, or Philip touched upon that a little bit. But do you think that that's going to build even further? Maybe swing that back to you, Philip, first. Do we see more engagement of consumers in the actual film? Just
I'm not sure about that. I know Netflix has been experimenting with audience interaction, with allowing you to take different paths during a story. But I think people generally like being told stories, and they liking, a beginning, a middle, and an end most of the time, as a simplistic way of saying this. The actual idea, I think gaming is very well placed for that, but I'm not sure storytelling really is. But I'm old now, virtually old, and young people think very differently. I like what Nadia was saying earlier about YouTube channels having audiences and using that as a route to communicate new content. I think that's really exciting. And as independent, I see Curzon really as an independent publisher or a label, an old-fashioned record label. And I also think that big companies, the bigger they get, the more the new talent doesn't want to work with them. And provided you set yourself up in the right way, it's much easier for independents to discover new talent early on. And with small, big companies, integrated companies, but small companies helping those producers, I can see a really interesting scenario where there are lots of independent, lively and robust content distributors who are using the likes of YouTube channels, etc., to distribute content that the big boys simply can't cope with. So I'm optimistic on all levels.
No, that's good. I mean, I think that particularly YouTube, but that type of channel is so powerful, isn't it? In terms of seeing it with GarageBand and music, I agree with you. I mean, I think it can be blossom in a different way of creativity in the film industry. We've seen that already. Great. So, I mean, in terms of other questions, we've got some good ones. We won't be able to ask them all, I don't think, now. So what we try and do as well is to circulate the questions later with answers and things to the people who have been able to attend the webinar. So thank you for these questions. I've got one here around, well, it's maybe a little bit, Philip is very optimistic, but can Curzon remain profitable with only a third of your seats occupied owing to social distancing? What do you think about this distancing?
That little problem. I hoped you wouldn't ask that. Listen, it's a nightmare, and we're losing huge amounts of money every week, and we're only a relatively small company. Unless the studios start to release the bigger films quickly, actually, and don't hold them back for better times, it doesn't matter if the cinemas are open. people are not going to come if we don't provide the new content for them. We break even on about 65% of our expected occupancy. You know, I think the UK cinemas at the moment are between 20 and 25%. So you can see what a devastating thing it is already, even though the cinemas have been open or been able to be open since the 4th of July. So I am absolutely convinced we will come through this, but it's going to take a lot longer than anyone thinks. And the weaker companies, particularly the smaller cultural institutions, cinemas and theatres and anything which is enclosed and has seats, is going to face a very, very difficult future. And we should be aware of that.
I mean, I'm certainly hoping, I mean, I can feel it in my retail world for sure. I mean, yes, there's a way through this, but absolutely, so many businesses are hurting at the moment, and I hope that, you know, we all come through this as fast as we can. But we have to face that new reality and deal with the cards we've been dealt, for sure. I mean, I've been really positive hearing about, you know, the different points of view today, this afternoon, from all of you. So thank you, as panelists, in sharing different points of view on the film industry, on the cinemas, the future of the cinema, and so on. I mean, you know, it is being disruptive. It has been disrupted. It will continue to change and evolve. But you know, it's always going to be close to our hearts, I think, in terms of the emotions that a good film and can produce. And so, thank you very much for all your time and your thoughts. We'll circulate back the questions and the answers later. Maybe some just final thoughts from yourselves, from Nadia, and first, just final thoughts as we close. Thank you.
I think that the future is actually exciting, despite it all. There will be some, let's say, corrections. It's true, but there will also be new things, and people are forever ingenious. So I'm looking forward to what's happening next.
Yeah, thank you, Bertrand.
Yeah, well, I hope the session has proven that theatrical home entertainment needn't be, you know, in sort of in oppositional terms. And I think Philip's model offers real hope for that, for more flexibility, for the silos to disappear. Transactional VOD released at the same time as the film is in the cinemas needn't cannibalize the revenue that comes from the cinemas. It depends how it's done. I think what Philip just said, I love hearing practitioners, what Philip said about, you know, you test it in TVOD and then you put it back in the cinema if the demand is of a certain kind of intensity. That's all these kind of new techniques are being developed by people like himself who are finger on the pulse in terms of what the consumer wants. And that's what the technology enables. Everybody's really moving from a wholesale model to a direct contact and intimacy with the consumer.
Right, thank you. And Russ, just closing thoughts from you?
Yes, I think, as the other panelists said, I think what Philip and the Curzon are doing is a great model. It's a great way of doing it, and the free ways of doing it. I think it is exciting times for filmmaking, especially in the UK. There's a lot of new studios, and the technology is being able to give people tools. It still comes down to good stories. No new techniques or immersion or everything gets rid of that. It's got to be good storytelling, well told. That's it.
That's good. So Philip, in the final minutes, I'll leave it to you for final closure. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you. And I think, you know, with challenge comes opportunity. And I think technology provides that opportunity in a way that it has never done before to create more of a level playing field. I think that we will see a very different world in 2 or 3 years' time in terms of the film industry. There will be a lot of casualties, but there'll be a lot of new entrants and a lot of exciting developments that we're all going to look forward to.
Thank you. Very nicely put. So I'll hand back now to David, if you're there, David. We'll be closing shortly.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining the event this afternoon. We've now reached the end of our scheduled time. We're going to close this session now. So what I would like to ask you to do is to log off and please complete the survey form, which you should be able to see on your web browser as you exit this webinar. So thanks once again for joining us. Please log off and please complete our feedback survey. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.